Hello there everyone, Bright Red Mogul here, this time with a brand new series. Also, yes, I did film this right after the moving video, how could you tell? So, the Miller era. It's not good.
Oh, this sucks.
Plenty of people have gone on record saying that it isn't good. In fact, so many people have gone on record saying that it isn't good that anything bad I said about it would come across as beating a dead horse. But you know what isn't beating a dead horse? Me saying that not one, not two, but 3 whole episodes from this era are actually pretty good. Oh, I'm sure that won't get me trampled by the community at all. Get 'em, boys! Wait, what? No, stop it! Stop! Yeah, no, stop, you're screaming! There are actually other episodes from the Miller era that I like, such as Creaky Cranky or Salty Surprise, but those still suffer from having problems. Either they have just a bit too many problems for me to consider them the best of the era, like with Creaky Cranky, or they have a single problem that is so mind-numbingly frustrating that while it doesn't kill the whole episode for me, it's just as bad as having 5 problems, like with Salty Surprise. The episodes I'm going to talk about here, on the other hand, have little to no actual problems, and are so good in my opinion that they can compete with some of the Hit era's best. And keep in mind, the Hit era has some pretty darn good episodes in it, so that is quite the compliment. This video is going to be formatted like a top 3 list, in that I talk about these episodes from the least best to what I think is the best episode of the Miller era. No spoilers for what that is, by the way. So with all that said, let's get started with the video in the first ever installment of Bright Red Discussions. Coming in at 3rd place, we have...
Snow Tracks.
So fun fact, I actually hired some guy to give a brief synopsis of this particular episode, as well as their brief opinion on it before I get into the major critiquing. I guess we should bring him in now. Hey, Master, get in here! He's not moving. Don't worry, guys, this is a regular occurrence. He probably thinks I'm gonna kill him or something. Like I'd ever do that. Just gotta get... There, the door's open there.
Is this microphone on? Hello everyone, it's me, Master454, and James has finally let me out of his basement, so I can finally talk to people again. Anyways, I'm here to review Misty Island Rescue.
I swear to God, if you mess this up, this basement's gonna look like a safe haven.
What's it called? Snow Tracks, yeah. So, I love this episode. It's a really good episode. It has a few things I don't like. This episode should probably be renamed to, abusing Gordon for a couple of minutes, and then he becomes happy at the end. But in general, this episode's really cool, and yeah. And I'm not trying to say that the era of which this episode was made in was not very good, but this is one of the episodes that stands out. Another thing is how Gordon is really confident, and then Gordon just gets abused by the snow, and it's kind of funny, to be honest, seeing Gordon getting abused for a few minutes. I love some of the panoramic shots also. Anyway, that's all I have because I don't really have a purpose in the world right now. So, yeah, bye.
Well, that was interesting. But seriously, Master, why do you have to make me explain the plot? That was literally your job. In this particular story, Gordon has to take a coal delivery to Brendam Docks. He is explicitly told by Sir Topham Hatt to go the long way around, as in no hills, but Gordon thinks he's strong enough to handle the snow and ice, so he decides to go the quick way around, which coincidentally has many hills. Through typical Three Strikes formula hijinks, he gets Spencer covered in snow, crashes into several slate cars, and accidentally gets Thomas into a snowy wreck after he fails to go up his own hill. After all of this, Gordon finally realizes that he was wrong to try and go the quick way around, and so after delivering his own train, he rescues Thomas and helps him deliver his train. And wow, look at that, we've got a nice little happy ending there. So with the plot summary out of the way, let's get to talking about what I think of the actual episode. I'm going to start with the positives in this segment, and only in this segment. For starters, I really like how Gordon is handled here. Not only is he perfectly in character while still being able to have remorse from his actions and learn from them, which is something that seasons 19 to 24 didn't really do for the most part, but the situation he's placed in also makes sense for him. We've seen Gordon pulling heavy goods trains before, most notably in Edward and Gordon, so him having to deliver a heavy coal train isn't too far-fetched. I mean, granted, he's only hauling like 3 coal wagons, but that is exclusively the animation's problem. It isn't relevant to the story, nor do any of the characters mention he's hauling 3 wagons, so I can easily brush this off. A good example of how something like this can go wrong is the episode Oh the Indignity. Gordon is perfectly in character in that, but then you stop caring when you realize he's being sent to work at a literal garbage dump. I will not be elaborating further, because it should not be a mystery why this is a problem.
Oh, the indignity!
Unlike that episode, Snow Tracks actually makes a point of putting Gordon in a believable situation, and that is just as important as the characters being in character. And I think that's what I like about this episode. It's not a super noteworthy grand story with so much in it to unpack, but it is a simple yet fun story with good characterization in a setting that makes sense. It even ends with a respect for Gordon-like scene at the sheds that's kinda wholesome in a way, even if it isn't nearly as good as the scene in said episode.
I have something very important to say. No engine is special, and every engine is best.
Thomas and his friends whistled. They all agreed with Gordon.
However, this isn't exactly the end of the segment, because I do still believe this episode has problems. 2 to be exact. My first issue with this episode is, wow, what a surprise! There's conveniently 2 hills on the main line before Gordon's Hill, and the second hill is conveniently bigger than the first one, but smaller than Gordon's Hill. Wowie zowie! So yeah, the geography in this episode is really whack. Then again, this is a Miller episode, so I really shouldn't be surprised. My second issue with this episode is a little bit more major. This episode follows the 3 strikes formula, and I bring this up because the second strike makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Like, okay, I can kinda see the first strike happening. I mean, if an engine went fast enough down a hill while clearing snow, it wouldn't be too out of the question for some of that snow to land on a passing engine. And the third strike is honestly the best of the bunch, because it's a giant snowy boulder chasing Gordon and Thomas down a steep hill. Similar occurrences have happened before and after this episode, like in Percy's New Whistle or Emily in the Middle. So again, not too far-fetched. But I'm sorry, just how does the snow Gordon is clearing manage to land on his face and then not get instantly blown away due to his speed? And the worst part is, this didn't even need to happen for the second strike to happen. The points could still have been set onto that siding, and Gordon could still have trouble braking, thus crashing into the sled cars at the end of said siding. Why did they add this detail that makes no sense whatsoever if it wasn't even important to the story?
What the hell is the point of that?
Regardless of those flaws though, none of them detract from my liking of this episode. Snow Tracks is still really solid. And now, coming in at second place, we've got...
Muddy Matters.
Oh hey, Nitrogen Era grass textures, didn't see you there. Random side tangent, can we talk about how abysmal these textures are? Like, what even is this? What's going on here? This is single-handedly the worst aspect of Nitrogen's animation. It's not the dull lighting, it's not the unrealistic fog. No, it's these godforsaken grass textures. They literally look like a pea-stained rug. Anyways, let's get to talking about what I was actually going to talk about in the first place. In this episode, Sir Topham Hatt states that somebody has to take Farmer McCall's sheep, as well as his sheepdog Katie, to the fairgrounds for generic soda fair number 5678, and that whoever does it will have their photograph taken for the front page of the daily newspaper. James, of course, jumps at this opportunity. When James arrives to collect the animals, Farmer McCall states that he wants James to go on the fast and flat track to the fairgrounds, and that his sheep must not get dirty. However, when James comes to a junction where one track is flat but muddy and the other is bumpy but dry, he decides to go over the bumpy and dry track. Because the tracks are so bumpy, the latch on the sheep trailer rattles loose, and when James stops at Marin to brag to Emily about his special, the sheep push open the trailer door and run away. The rest of the episode from there is James trying to find the sheep while remaining as clean as possible, before he eventually realizes that
It doesn't matter if we're dirty. We have to be there.
after that he gets all muddy before finding the sheep and delivering them, and even as a dirty engine, still gets to have his photograph taken for the front page of the newspaper. I think this episode is better than Snow Tracks because rather than having 2 or 3 issues, it only really has 1, so I'll get into that now. How did James just so happen to find the sheep wherever he did? When James and Katie thought the sheep would be heading to the farm, it kinda made sense there because James has been on Soda for a long time. He knows where locations are in relation to other locations. But how did James find the sheep when leaving Marin and that one other time? He didn't even know where they'd be on those particular occasions. What, did he just continue on the track he was already on and just hope that the sheep would be wherever he ended up? It makes no sense to me. But other than that issue, none in my opinion. Now let's talk about the things this episode gets right. For starters, this line exchange is actually kind of funny.
Will Katie and Farmer McColl's sheep be in the photograph too?
They might be in the background.
That exchange actually felt pretty natural, surprisingly so for this era of repetitive dialogue. It's like the characters are actually allowed to have character. Oh my god, what a revelation!
Okay?
This episode is actually quite similar to Snow Tracks in that it manages to get James's character 100% right, and again, the situation he's placed in also makes sense. However, there is one more episode that we can compare Muddy Matters to, and that is Season 11's Dirty Work. Both of these episodes build on James's character by making him shove aside his looks for a more important cause. This is something I really like, because it shows that James isn't just an arrogant snob who's obsessed with his shiny red paintwork. When it's important, he can actually cast that aside. Something else that both of these episodes do is have nobody really care about how dirty James is. In Dirty Work, James still gets to be the star of the show at Lord Callan Castle, even though he, well...
My flags are drooping and I'm covered in coal dust and quarry dust and fish.
And in Muddy Matters, James still gets to have his photograph on the front page of the newspaper, even though he's, well, muddy. I like this too, because it shows that James's vanity is very unneeded, and what really matters at the end of the day is that he has been a really useful engine. Real nice stuff.
So, a very muddy James had his photograph taken with Katie the Muddy Sheepdog, Farmer McColl, Sir Topham Hatt, and lots of muddy sheep. James had never been happier to be the dirtiest engine on Sodor.
And finally, the absolute best episode of the Miller era goes to...
Happy birthday, sir.
So the plot of this episode is that it's Sir Topham Hatt's birthday today, and Thomas is waiting at the docks with Salty and Edward. Then the fat man himself arrives on Winston and tells Thomas that he has to bring Winston along with him on his jobs, because Winston is new and apparently needs to learn what it means to be really useful, even though he's literally just a track inspection car and can't do anything but what. After he leaves, Salty and Edward tell Thomas and Winston a story about how the fat man used to celebrate his birthday.
Every year, on his birthday, Sir Topham Hatt and Edward would visit all of the stations on the railway and have a slice of birthday cake with the passengers, always in his favourite carriage, the oldest carriage on Sodor, even older than Edward.
He loved riding in that carriage. I remember his smile. It would light up the sky.
Ah, 'tis a pity nobody has seen that carriage for years. Anyways, I've jobs to do, and so have ye.
So Thomas goes off to do his jobs, with Winston following close behind. But throughout the episode, Winston isn't focused on following Thomas, but instead on finding the old carriage. And he never gets to tell Thomas this either, because every time Winston runs away and then comes back, Thomas interrupts Winston by saying,
Looking for things is not being really useful.
Eventually, when Winston finds the carriage, Thomas actually listens to him and is delighted. They refurbish the carriage and present it to Sir Topham Hatt, who couldn't be more happy about his birthday surprise. So what are my problems with this episode? Well, there are none. Yep, I said it. There's literally no problems I have with Happy Birthday, Sir. Like, the only problem I can think of is that I still don't really get why Winston had to follow Thomas around, but even that doesn't detract from how good this episode is for me. And unlike Snow Tracks or Muddy Matters, which were nice but didn't have much to talk about, there's actually quite a decent bit of compliments I can give Happy Birthday, Sir. So let's get started with that.
Very well.
First of all, I really like the Sir Topham Hatt lore we get in this. The backstory at the start of this episode is actually pretty wholesome, and it gives us some insight on the early years of the railway, which is always something I appreciate from the CGI series. Secondly, Thomas isn't completely stupid in this episode. In almost every single other episode from this era where Thomas was the main character, he was always portrayed as a reckless idiot who either didn't do his job properly or just straight up abandoned his jobs for whatever selfish reasons he had. But here, absolutely none of that. Thomas actually cares about his jobs for once and tries to get them done properly, without letting Winston distract him from doing so. Again with this quote.
Looking for things is not being really useful. Being on time is.
Thirdly, this episode does something that episodes like Henry's Hero do, by having two flawed protagonists. Both of the main characters in Happy Birthday, Sir are right in their own ways, but they're also wrong. Thomas was right to want to do his jobs properly, and again, that is also refreshing coming from this era, but he was also wrong to not remotely listen to Winston when he was trying to tell him something. Winston was also wrong to try and ditch Thomas at every single opportunity he had, but he did have a semi-good reason for it. He wanted to surprise Sir Topham Hatt on his birthday with the old carriage. Because in theory, why wouldn't this old relic from the fat man's childhood years make a good birthday surprise for him? It would have been different if Winston was searching for, like, I don't know, balloons or whatever.
Where are the balloons? We must have balloons for a party.
But this actually makes sense. Plus, Winston isn't just another vehicle that the fat man controls. He's his personal vehicle. So there's a bit of an extra reason there as to why you'd want to make him happy on his birthday. And when they do refurbish the carriage and present it to Sir Topham Hatt, the man sounds like he's about to cry.
Oh my! I remember this. Every year, on my birthday.
It's actually kind of sweet and heartwarming to see Sir Topham Hatt this happy. I love it. And the music is so triumphant here as well. This feels too good for season 16. I genuinely cannot think of a better way you could have ended not just this episode, but the entire Miller era as a whole. It's just a really good ending to a really good episode.
And that made Thomas and Winston happier than ever.
Oh wait, nope, I was wrong. It turns out that this is actually the second to last episode of the Nitrogen era, and what we actually got as the finale was a mediocre story about Toby and Rheneas, where both of them were out of character. Great! Well, that's about it. Those are my top 3 Miller era episodes. A very quick disclaimer before anybody screams at me in the comments, although it's probably way too late by now. This is not a defense of the entire Miller era. 3 great episodes out of 80 does not make a good era, even if you add the unmentioned episodes I like into the mix. The Miller era is still pretty bad overall. However, with that said, I don't see any harm in talking about the very few elements that this era gets right, and even if you disagree with my opinions, I hope you at least found this video to be an interesting perspective. I want to give a huge thank you to Inkmaster454 for being a part of this video. When I told him I was going to do this, he told me he wanted to cover snow treks for the video, so I let him do just that. The link to his channel will be in the description if any of you are interested in subscribing to him. Well, that about wraps up this video. Thank you all for watching. This is the Bright Red Mogul, signing off.